light will.
Great.
Maybe.
Shane, you're gonna take it off?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yay.
Here we are. I know, right?
Yeah, everybody take a collective breath. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take a breath and let it out. I'll be watching you live too.
We're live.
All right.
Wonderful.
Hello, and welcome. Welcome, everybody.
Good to be here.
I'm Shay Cage, and I am very excited to be co-moderating this space with Heidi Batz. But before we begin, I think a lot of times we have the luxury of having conversations in our community, in our own homes or behind closed doors, but this one is being live streamed. And I think it's an interesting dichotomy when you have an audience that's actually not here physically with you because of COVID, because of other issues. So I want to acknowledge the audience that is here, Heidi's work and mine, and I think everybody in this circle talks about the importance of the circle and the power of that. So you are the missing part of that circle. So welcome. Race matters. Race and equity is a hot topic right now. It's always been for my community, so ain't nothing new about that. So I just want to welcome and acknowledge and take a breath with you and our participants. And that may feel weird to some people, but just a lot of us are holding. It took a lot to get here, right? Just even to walk here, from your car to here. So I would just invite us in the spirit of racial and healing justice to take a collective breath together. And to really center all that we are carrying on our bodies, to place George Floyd in the middle of that circle and all those that we have left. We're going to take that breath in on the count of 3, and you can let it out at your own pace. 1, 2, and 3. Ashe. I want to also acknowledge that we are standing on Dakota land, and may we never forget that. That this is Dakota land, this is stolen land. It is a privilege to be on this land. It's also a privilege to be hosted in this wonderful third space gallery, and Heidi will bring Wing up in a second to really properly, third place gallery, to properly acknowledge the space that we're in. Catalyst Arts is co-partnering with Inclusion in Action, and for those of you that know Catalyst Arts, we are a small arts organization. E.G. and I have been doing the work of community building and organizing for years, really centering art. We believe that art changes everything. It's just that simple. So in that spirit, I'm gonna maybe move the mic, the invisible mic, to Heidi.
Thank you, Shane. Wonderful to be in this space with all of you. Inclusion Action, what we do at Inclusion Action is we bring people together who have diverse lived experiences to learn with and from one another, because we believe nothing significant is ever accomplished alone. Those of us that are theater artists in the space, the power of ensemble is really what drives us. And our mission at Inclusion Action is to move people to the intersection of arts, business, and community, because we think that that's where people can cultivate their own and others' human potential to advance equity, which is so important right now. So thank you all for being here in this conversation. And thank you so much to our host, Wing Young Hui, who is hosting all 3 of the sessions. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your work in your space.
Thank you. Welcome to the third place. I've occupied this space for over 9 years and have lived in the neighborhood. We're in the central neighborhood right now for over 20 years. On the walls is a smattering of photographs and projects that I've done in my 40-year career so far. In one project, Lake Street, USA, which was 20 years ago, I photographed thousands of people along this major thoroughfare, which is really a microcosm of society. It displays 675 photos, some billboard size, in windows and sides of buildings, turning Lake Street into a 6-mile gallery. I met the people I photographed in all kinds of ways, often on the street. Many I interviewed and included their words along with their photos. 10 years later, I did another 6-mile exhibition, public exhibition along University Avenue in St. Paul. At the third place, we've had hundreds of artists over the 9 years use this space as an informal art incubator to show works in progress or something they've never tried before, encouraging them to make it as interactive as possible. Then after an event, we roll out the ping pong table over there and do karaoke in the basement. Maybe not today, but I'm also in schools a lot, showing students what I do so that they can do it. When I tell them I have photographed thousands of students, thousands of strangers, their reaction is, "That's creepy." Then I have them photograph each other and have conversations, which in the beginning can be a bit awkward because most of their fellow students are strangers to them. I am continually confronted by my own biases when I break out of my personal, cultural, and technological bubble and talk to people I don't know. If we as a society redefine what a stranger was, perhaps we would have more of a society. One conversation at a time. We are strangers.
So powerful, yeah, Ashe. Thank you, Wing. And I would just like to add that I watched the short video that's on your website about the What Do You See project. And one of the things I really loved is that you talk in that video about the fact that when you're photographing, when you're capturing images, that you find yourself checking your own biases. And that's just really important because we're going to talk a lot about bias today. We're going to talk about racism. It's really important that I and many of you who are of the white culture, or white dominant community, that we really start to check our biases and understand how racism really affects people disproportionately. So thank you for the work that you do. Appreciate you having us here.
Thank you. So I would like to just frame the conversation really quickly and then get into introducing the panelists that are here. What a privilege it is to have each and every one of them here. I know that you all are doing incredible work in your own communities, in your own homes, in your own institutions. So to make this space, not just for yourselves, but actually for the community, as an action. I think this is a very, very specific action that we are doing here today around centering race and justice. I wanted to actually, so two things. So I want to bring Toni Morrison in the space. I want to bring in Maya Angelou and her spirit in the space. We have actually recently watched her documentary, and the one thing I would like to lift from that documentary, in addition to the impression that she's made on my own life and art, is something that she said about her childhood experience, because she was sent to Staples, Mississippi. I'm from Mississippi. And it really colored a lot of the reason why she wrote the book, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. But what I like to lift is, she said that we are the sum total of all of our experiences. And for me, that's so important. It's the dark and the light. And then in addition to that, I want to really bring in, lastly, Black Visions Collective, because they are doing some incredible work in this community to just wake people up. These young folks are just bold and on fire and so clear and smart. And so from their website, I just want to read a little section and then do the introductions. They say, as an organization dedicated to Black liberation and to collective liberation, we need a radical and ongoing investment in our own healing by claiming love for our own bodies, our own psyches, our own experiences, and by building the resources we need to integrate healing justice into all that we do. We are insisting on conditions that carry us towards the next generation of work and towards a deeper place of freedom for all of us. So the last part is, I believe, the frame for our conversation today. The next generation of work towards a deeper place of freedom for all of us. So really owning that it's not just one community that's doing the work. It's not one people, one person, individual. It's really the all of it. I am privileged to have the Honorable Sharon Sayles Belton in the space, a former mayor of Minneapolis, the first woman and first African American to hold that office. So I'm going to do a zip introduction, and then we'll go right back to the beginning and have each one of them introduce themselves properly in the context of this conversation and my prompt. Second, to Sharon's left, we have Maija Garcia. who is a Cuban-American director and choreographer. She is also the director of professional training at the Guthrie. And to Maija's left, we have Merritt Rodriguez, Mexican-American white woman, production manager and freelance designer and technician in the city, and also with University Rebuild. I have to Merritt's left, is it left? E.G., the other right. We have E.G. Bailey, who is a Liberian artist, filmmaker, curator, visionary, and founder of True Roots. And to E.G.'s left, we have Heidi Batz, who is white American, the founder of Inclusion in Action, and has really had a lifelong history of working around diversity and equity. Yeah, so we are met. We are met. So Sharon, I'm going to open it right up to you to jump in with a little more context of what brings you to this very unique conversation around race and equity. And then my prompt is very simple, is how do we really talk about racial disparities? Because I think it's really easy to talk around them, but as you introduce yourself, I think that's the prompt that I would give you. How do we really talk about it? For me, I'll kick it off. For me, it's when I found out the educational and economic disparity of our fine city, I was blown away. So I'll give more information on that later. So Sharon, tell us about it.
So first, let me just say that I'm delighted to be here and really excited to be a part of the conversation, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, I really want to be engaged in this conversation about disparities and how we, our community and allies work together. But I also like this idea of the intersection between business, community, and art. Because I've long believed that if we really want to have real conversations that we're sometimes afraid to have, an easy way to do that, a non-threatening way to do that, is through art. And so we talked about the Lake Street Project in the introduction of the wonderful work that has been done by this extraordinary artist amongst us. That exhibit opened up a whole series of conversations in our community. Just the art hanging there, maybe with not a statement behind it, but just inviting us to look at it, opened up our hearts and our minds and our souls to new perspectives and different ways of seeing our community. There are a number of examples of that all across the Twin Cities area in the form of art. But I don't think people think about art in that way.
Yeah.
And I think we have to talk about art in that way. The ability of art to transform our community. This is something that I really believe, and I believe this for a long time. And some of my work in City Hall reflects that. But I wanted to just start in a different place. I want people to understand that this intersection of 38th and Chicago is where I grew up when I moved from St. Paul to Minneapolis. So I grew up here. I grew up at 40th and 4th Avenue. The first time I bought my home, I bought a home at 38th and Oakland, a stone's throw from where we're sitting today. I represented this area on the city council for 10 years. I grew up in the neighborhood, and I was elected to represent the neighborhood some, 17 years after graduating from high school or something like that. Don't count the numbers, right? But this intersection of 38th and Chicago, where the Cup store is, there used to be Wilhelm Pharmacy. I went there every day. We had a big Franklin on the store. This is my neighborhood. This is my community. I go to church in this neighborhood. And not too long ago, we took a group of people from our church and we just did a walking tour of the neighborhood. And we walked up Chicago Avenue. And we walked up Chicago Avenue and we talked about the transformation of this community at that point in time 2 years ago. And then we talked about our vision for the transformation of this community. And what was at the heart of that whole conversation and that walking tour was in this community for decades have been people who are caring, committed, loving their children, working hard for their children, trying to survive, grow, and expand, and nobody was paying attention to our condition and nobody cared. And I'm not just saying that to say that there were a few people here and there that cared, but I want you to really, I want to underscore the fact that for decades, there are neighborhoods in the city of Minneapolis that people have turned away from and ignored. And every problem that you could have in a community would be nestled and embedded in that community. So if we really want to talk about change, we really have to look at all of those problems and issues that you have compounded and stacked on top of each other and work through those things, and at the same time work through why did that happen. And when you answer the question about why that happened, then you can talk about race. Then you can understand race, and then maybe you can think about how you construct, a resolution to all of that, kind of compounded problem issues and struggles. So every social determinant of health and well-being, every disparity and every social, and human disparity is here in our community. So I kind of start there. And my entire career in public life, which was 20 years, you add the mayor in, it was focused and dedicated on trying to work through all of that complexity. Not one thing, multiple things. Not, a vertical, but, horizontal. I used to call it three-dimensional chess. You have to play in order to beat this, whatever this is, this oppression.
Thank you. Woo! Maija Garcia.
Yes, Ms. Sharon. So thank you for setting us up with that challenge in terms of three-dimensional chess. I love everything that Sharon is talking about in terms of how do we value the transformative power of arts in our community. I am a director, choreographer, producer, and educator. I started off in studying sustainable development and looking at how do we build our communities, from the ground up. How do we figure out what resources we have available to us to support the people in a locality that so that in the age of globalization we're not disenfranchising people because of trade deals, etc. So I came from that mind and as an activist and an artist in my youth, and then coming into through the dance community, through the contemporary, modern, and Afro-Caribbean dance community, dance of the African diaspora really opened my heart, opened me up to what art can be as a healing and transformative process. That we can actually build around the drum, we build around the circle, we bring everybody together through the arts to then awaken possibility. So that's the school that I come from. I worked many years for Belton Jones, and I've traveled the world, so in that way I acknowledge my privilege, and my bias is also from being an artist who actually got a chance to see the world. And and there's so much more to see, obviously, but I lived most of my artistic life in New York City. I started my own company called Organic Magnetics, which is about building art sustainably and building art toward cultural dialogue. I focused a lot of my work on historical narratives because I'm really interested in how, breaking it down. Why did that happen, as you say? How did we get here? So you can't talk about equity unless you look at the genocide of the Native American people of the Americas, not just the US, the Americas. You can't look at equity unless you look at the history of slavery, not even just in the Americas, but across the world, the oppression of black people all over the place. We can't have those conversations unless we look back, unless we really understand how these systems were built. And so I'm really interested in my art making to explore also the stories of people that aren't told. Like I love that when we got here, you was looking at these books, because it's always about the research. It's always about digging a little bit deeper and seeing whose story is not being illuminated right now that can help us make meaning of and understand our world today. And sometimes it's important, I think, to pull ourselves out of the current moment, because oftentimes we can't see the forest through the trees because we're so emotionally charged about what's happening now. And I find that when you take yourself into another place in time, or in this place in another time, then you can sort of track the transformations that have already occurred to understand then how we build from here. So I'm really interested in working with, not just working with other artists and organizers and activists, but figuring out how the way we make art is also needs to be changed, right? Who's at the table? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the decision makers? Like, because artists are oftentimes at the bottom of that pay scale. They're the least empowered, and they have the most value. And so my question really, as we were looking at, because I came here from New York City to work at the Guthrie Theater. I'm learning about this city as we go. I can learn so much from all of you about this city. But when I got here, I was told a story that the education system was amazing. But I have a black partner and a brown son, and we found that not to be true in some neighborhoods.
Well, and we're like 50, the last time I looked, 52nd in terms of the gap, the racial gap, and how we're failing our
That's
black
right.
kids.
That's right.
So I mean, we're not just down there, we're way
48,
down
49, and 50
Yeah.
in educating black children,
Yeah.
Native American children, and Latino and Latinx
Yeah.
children. So we are failing our young people of color. We are failing them, and specifically failing them here. Why?
That's
The
a
city
really,
is so well resourced. Why? So these are the questions I'm asking as a new member of this community.
Absolutely.
forgive me for jumping in here, but I think it's really important, Maija, that we acknowledge and that the people that are joining us today acknowledge that we tell ourselves the story that people come here because we have a good education system. We tell ourselves the story that people come here for healthcare. And yet the disparities in both healthcare and education are daunting. They're embarrassing. So it's a part of, I think, what you're raising is really...
Housing.
Housing, yeah.
But that's a narrative for white people.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah, that's your narrative, that's your experience. And so it's not a lie from the perspective that you're talking about your own lives, right? But if you're talking about all the rest of us, it's suspect.
Yeah, exactly, and I'll just make one more comment, and then I'd love to hear from Merritt. But something that you were saying, Maija, made me think, when we talk about that the education system is failing our black and brown students, that is absolutely 100% true. But I would put out the challenge to my white friends and community, if we're failing our black and brown students, we're failing ourselves as well. Because there's so much value that these students, these young people, these educators have to make a pluralistic society instead of a singular society, where whites have the privilege to have access to opportunities and others don't. Then we're failing ourselves.
Yes.
I just want to be here all day.
It's hard to even, I want to stay on that conversation. My name is Merritt Rodriguez, and I came here as part of, I think, University Rebuild, first and foremost, as a way to make sure that our history is being told now, as now is the time we begin telling our history, and that is something that needs to be told collectively and needs to be told by people who have generally been marginalized and voices have been taken from them. And so that's, as our group, I'm one of a series of five, a cohort of five who's leading that effort. But we're intensely passionate about the fact that this isn't our story to tell, but it is collectively a story to be told by our communities. And I think that's something that I have felt growing up in a small town in Iowa with a Mexican father who was a professor of music education and had no peers for the longest time in his discipline. And then moving to Florida and finding this amazing culture of diversity and not that it's always inclusive, everywhere has their problems, but then coming back up to Minnesota and really seeing that very distinct segregation, not just in housing, not just in education, but also in theater, also in art, and being acutely aware that that is promoted consistently, and trying to make conversation and space to figure out, as predominantly white artists are surrounding me to help this motion forward, how we also can stand up for one another and making space for people of color to come up in our world, because we don't have the education instituted in elementary and high schools of color to actually bring them up into this world, and there are financial barriers into which you walk into in pay scales of artists, and there are just so many ways that we keep people out, and really investigating how we can all help our community in this moment, but how as artists we can voice what needs to happen next. And really form that for ourselves in a moment of COVID where we all have time suddenly to sit and focus on what's been wrong and how it's been wrong and how we're propagating that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you just joined us, if you're joining the live stream, I know people join at different points. This is a conversation, Make It Matter, a conversation about race and equity, about forward-moving change, about inviting all of our community, black, brown, white, everybody into the conversation to really address what is the role that you play and what are the things that you can shift. So how do we collectively make some change, but also how do you step into the center of that? We are actually in an organic conversation that's introductions and like visions and positions. So I'm gonna invite E.G. Bailey into the space to introduce yourself and step into that.
Yeah, my name is E.G. Bailey, and I'm a Liberian American artist. I grew up in Liberia till I was 10. And grew up outside of Chicago and ended up in Minneapolis in the mid-90s. And so I've been in the community here for over 25 years. And for me, aside from cultural lens and personal lens, the main lens that I look at things is through arts, and so I engage with the world through the arts. And for me, when I first came to the Twin Cities, or shortly after I came to the Twin Cities, I was part of a collective called Series B, which was a black male performance collective, and we had a chance to work with the Hittite Empire from LA, and really went through in our form, there was over 15 of us, black male artists under 25 at the time, and we were trained and taught to look within our community and see what people aren't talking about, what isn't being dealt with, what are the issues that are not being confronted. What are the sacred cows that need to be confronted, and we were taught to address those things through our art, and so that's the principle that I have worked with all these years. And if you look at whether it's organizations I've started, whether it's projects I've done in terms of spoken word, film, music. Even starting a record label was based on the fact of artists not having a platform or having access. There were no spoken word record labels at the time, and I felt that it was important because spoken word was really an art form that was coming from the voice of the community and was an opportunity. Especially for artists of color to be able to speak their truth and have a platform. And when you have 3 minutes where people have to listen to you and you can say whatever you want, that was an amazing thing. We taught in the schools for over 10 years. And so, to me, that's the lens that I operate from, and I'm you know, a huge advocate for the arts because I know the value that the arts have. We have also been part of the creative city making projects. We've been embedded in the city as artists within city departments. We've worked with neighborhoods and looking at a paradigm of not dictating the city from top down, but how do you go from community and from neighborhoods and find out what it is that the neighborhoods and the community members are saying that they need, rather than being told what they need or coming in to say, okay, we want to do a survey to find out what's going on, and then we'll take this to the powers that be and we'll see what we can do, you know, but really the community saying, these are the things we're looking for that can't be found in a survey. And we engage with that through the arts and you know,
who created the survey? You know what I mean?
Right.
Exactly.
The act of creating the survey is also, or not involving community is a way of actually not creating equity.
Right. And so that's the standpoint that I've been working from, and essentially all my art really speaks about that, you know, from community, for community, really looking at issues, and sometimes issues that, you know, the community may not necessarily want to deal with themselves, you know, but things that we ourselves have to face. And so that's where I operate from. You know, there billions of dollars is generated by the arts, and this is where I get on my soapbox. To have as much contribution that the arts does, and yet have arts and artists and communities of artists and artists of color be so devalued in the system is mind-boggling. You know, when we were part of those studies, finding out that the arts generates more than sports, yet we have $1 billion stadium and so little value given to education, so little value given to arts, huge issues of housing. You know, that revenue could have been put other places that would have brought more value to our city, you know, than a shiny building, you know. And I'm still fighting for an art stadium. And you know,
Let the record show.
The price range is set at $2.5 billion.
Thank
Is
you.
what needs to be invested
We
into
can do
the
that
art
now, it's
stadium.
outdoors.
Well, and here's the other thing. What is operating right now and what is not operating right now?
Right.
As of right now, what is operating? Artists. Artists and
Small
community activists. Small artists are operating right now.
Or
What is not
organizations that are nimble. So I think that's also, you know, so
But
yeah.
looking at it through this lens, sports are not operating right now. You know, Hollywood production is just getting back into place. However, community artists, arts organizations are on the ground and doing this work that is speaking to the historical transformation that is happening. Communities are doing that, artists are doing that, corporations are not swooping in to do that. Sports are not operating right now. So where should the true investment have gone to?
And
To the
that's,
community.
hold that question, because I think we're gonna let Heidi speak, and then as we unravel this and really kind of fold in cultural integrity into the work and what that means, I think we'll circle back to that.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. So I'm going to share by building on things that each of you have thrown into the space. And the first is building on that you grew up here. I met my husband in this neighborhood. I started my Undoing Racism journey through my work at Pillsbury House Theater in 1994.
Yeah.
Right? And for those of you who are joining us today, it's a lifelong journey. You don't, there's this colleague of mine, this business peer from Downtown Council, who says he's embarked recently on his journey, and he's like, so I said to him, you know, you never get an A in this. And he's like, can I get a B+? So no, it's a lifelong, and so I say that just because I know that a lot of our viewers and our audience are leaning in right now. You're paying attention and you have a high level of concern, but you have to understand that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and you have got to make the commitment to educating yourself and to learning some things that you probably are not going to like a lot about your culture, your white culture. So, so love the fact that we have that in common in this neighborhood. In terms of having artists at the table, super important, but here's what I'll say. Dismantle the table and make whatever space you need new together. It's such an important part of this white construct, you know. It's like, just a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, because I've been doing this work for 20 years. So when I first started, it was multiculturalism, right? And then it was diversity. And then it was inclusion. And now finally we've moved to equity, which makes me very hopeful, because all of those other things don't do anything for us as a collective society unless we really have that equity talk. So that's super important to me. But part of equity is, you know, get rid of the table. I don't need you to invite. I don't need to invite you to the table. I don't need to welcome you to the table. I need to get out of the way, put the supplies in the middle of the floor, and say, how can we organize and use our strengths to make a table, right? So that's my what soapbox I get on about equity. I am an Iowa survivor, small town Iowa survivor.
Are there any big towns?
You know, I don't know, but you know, I've.
There's one big city. There's one sort of big city because we used to always go there for hip hop, and there would be so many people of color. And I'm like, where did these? Yeah, it was Des Moines.
Yeah. But I'm an Iowa survivor, and I say that, and I say that with pride because a big part of my journey has been having to face the fact that I was raised steeped in racism by people that I love very much, and that actually doing this work and advancing equity means challenging some of those notions, and it's painful, and it's hard, but it takes practice. So that's what I'm talking about, like being in it for the long run. And this relational piece that you talk about with the community is actually what I want to touch on, Shay, before I hand it back to you, which is the notion of disparities. So what this moment in time means for me right now is it's twofold, right? Like at first, I mean, my husband had to pry me off the ceiling. I was so rageful and so angry that people are finally paying attention, you know? It's like, where have you been all this time? But the second piece of it is I'm really hopeful, because I feel like there's so much energy in the movement. What I'm concerned about is that because we're heightening awareness around the disparities, the healthcare disparities, the educational, the police brutality disparities, what I'm concerned about is that people, specifically white people, are going to remain audience to that and not become participants in that conversation. And that's just not okay. So I want to just one more thing about disparities, because I think this is really important, and it took me a while to land on this myself. I didn't coin this phrase, but picked it up and have used it, that relational disparity has to be addressed before transactional disparity. So like I was reading about the Rondo neighborhood and about how what was so wonderful about the way that neighborhood came together is that you had people that cared for the community, cared for the people in the community, were role models for the community. That was the backbone of the Black community.
I actually was born
in Rondo. I know that.
Yeah.
So it started me thinking, you know, how are we going to demolish relational disparities if you ask yourself, and actually just ask yourself this question: who do you worship with? Who do you vacation with? Who do you invite to dinner? Who comes to your family gatherings, birthdays, weddings, anniversaries? And if that picture in your mind doesn't include people of color, then how can we start to dismantle the relational disparities that create the access to opportunities that we know everybody needs? So that's just something I've been thinking about.
Wonderful.
I love it. I want to open it up because I feel like what the beauty of actually inviting incredible people to the circle that are living, whose lives already sort of are steeped in movement work and activism and political education and advancing equity, is that there's so many natural intersections, right? So even if I give you a prompt, there's going to be so many other layers here. So I do feel like folding in the question, and I'm a little curious, but I don't want to position an answer before putting the question there. So as we talk about cultural integrity, as we talk about just the word integrity, as we talk about shifts that really need to be made with dominant culture, as we really talk about calling things out in a systemic way, I mean, it's a lot of work, right? And I love that you bring in sort of the one-to-one, right? How do you check, it's not like, oh, got that one friend, got that one neighbor, so it's really about how is your life integrated in a way where it's not just about you and whiteness.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, and beyond that, there's only so much work I can do. I do the work that I do for my community, and I'm very clear about that. Now, there's spillage over it, and I do believe in us all being in this together, so that's why I've been using the hashtag, we're all in this together. But I want to invite the whole circle, the circle is open, and so nobody's leading it at this point, to really continue to dig through this mountain that is disparities, but also how is the cultural integrity brought into that fold? What do we even mean by that? Even in terms of equity, people are still confused. Some people are still confused. What do you mean when you talk about equity? And who is making the shifts? Are we going to tear up the table? Well, I don't know. I might have a disability. I might need a table, but maybe it doesn't need to be square. Maybe could it be circular? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so coming with resources is not, there's many ways to look at resources. So I'm going to open that up to all of us and also those of you that are online. As you know, there's a chat option. Put some ideas in there and take this conversation, don't be a spectator. So take this conversation back to your families. I have conversations about race every single day with my children.
I would love to jump off just from that point, which is, and as a white woman, how do you avoid your whiteness? Because a lot of times we're talking about race and we're talking about other people's race, but we don't talk about the white race and we don't talk about the white culture, which is something that is endemic to our system. If we can't even be comfortable having a conversation about what it means to be white or what the cultural heritage of whiteness is, how are we going to investigate our relation to anyone else?
See, that's when it gets sticky. That's when the fight starts.
No.
The fight with words.
Right. But I actually came in with this question for Maija, because Maija, went to school on the West Coast, lived on the East Coast, right? Studied international relations and global, all this kind of stuff. One thing about the white culture, I think particularly the Midwest white culture, two things. First of all, we're competitive and we're conflict avoidant. And so if you're competitive and conflict avoidant, how do you wrestle through anything? I mean, is that your perception of kind of the white culture?
I don't know how to define white culture because I think white culture has yet to examine itself enough to define itself.
Yeah.
We need a whole episode on that one.
Yeah, because I was hearing you say white culture, and I was really kind of my brain is working on that one. Because I think I think there are white people who don't want to be affiliated with whatever white culture is, because they may want to distance themselves from it, and in that way, as you say, want to avoid it, or and avoidance is definitely, well, that might be the first word we write under white culture, avoidance of conflict.
Well, that's where privilege comes in.
But that's where privilege comes in. But I think that this Michelangelo Davis talks a lot about people of whiteness. She says if we're going to name everyone else as people of color.
I love it.
Well, then let's not center our, whiteness without naming it. Like we all have, like you said, so let's all stand in the middle and look out, as opposed to, assuming somebody's in the center. So I think like white culture needs to be examined. What is white culture? You said something about audience, right? Audience.
Sit back and be audience.
So and then Shay mentioned spectator. So I'm not trying to get into word work, even though I love word work. but being a spectator is assuming that you are watching a spectacle, and I think that is what white people do.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, and name things. Yeah, really. Like white people love to name things, claim things, own things. That's something that I'm just trying to find the threads, right?
Psychology.
The psychology of it. But an audience, a true audience is listening. And I think that we do need a white audience right now. I think that white audience needs to listen now to black people, to people who are in the movement, the artists on the street, and they need to even listen to their young white people who are trying to dismantle.
I'm gonna go to
Please,
Sharon and then
Sharon.
EG, and I actually want to do just that. I want to center brown and black right in this moment, and then we're gonna open it back up.
So I wanted to just, I'm really fascinated to hear the conversation about a whiteness, but the thing that is, kind of urgent, for me in this moment is that finally, after a whole series of, black people being killed by, police, white people are paying attention to this one.
Yep.
Okay, they're paying attention to this one, and because they're paying attention to this one, the storyline is gotten a lot bigger, and more people are talking about this has to stop. So I just want to just acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's frustrating and is a source of personal anger, but I never get stuck in the anger. Now it's opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I don't want to do is that I don't want to spend too much time thinking about how white people think about their own privilege and all of that. I think that has to happen, but what I really want to have happen right now is I want to have the fact that we are all together saying that this has got to stop, and we're figuring out what do we do right now to make this stop. And as we're working on that, then let's figure out, okay, now how has all this stuff been perpetuated? And then in that perpetuation scenario is when we get to start thinking about, okay, how have I been complacent, and why wasn't I paying attention, and why am I only putting Band-Aids on problems or facilitating Band-Aids, putting on problems that have been problems for a long time. But first, I do not want to get lost in the intellectual conversation about whiteness.
I love it. I'm gonna, EG, I can tell you've been wanting to say something, and we have about 5 minutes, 45, 50, we have about 10 minutes left. No, this is good, because it's a vibrant conversation, because I do think that it really does talk about what is our lived histories that we have to bring in the room, right?
Yeah.
And just know, even if we don't get to speak them. And then what are the distractions that can keep us away from defining the actionable items to move us forward? And also, like Sharon said, where do we start in that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like what we've been talking about with this series, and brown, and respecting brown people that are like, I ain't got time for this right here, but I can pick up this one. So I'll open it up to you, and then to pose the last question after that.
Well, I think to touch on what you've mentioned, and also in terms of white culture, I think what you were talking about in terms of dealing with the issue first, and saying, looking at what needs to stop. It's like if I was drowning, and you're sitting there debating about what caused me to drown, it's not going to make a difference. Save me first.
Right.
Save the conversation about why I'm in the water and why I'm drowning for later. Get me out of the water. So then maybe I could tell you why I ended up in the water, but first, save me, and or give me a branch and help me save myself, So, for me, yes, so I completely believe in that model, because we often do get distracted. And one of the things for me, and I've been saying it more often since all this started than not, is I don't look at myself as a minority. I don't look at myself as a minority. I am a free black man. I am a free African man. When I was growing up in Africa, I was free. When I was growing up in Liberia, I was free. When I came here, I suddenly did not lose my freedom. Unless there's something else going on that I was not told, I did not come to slavery. I did not come to America into slavery, right? So for me, and I think this relates to cultural integrity, operating from your standing and your ground and your freedom, your spiritual, mental, physical freedom and operating from that, and wherever that cultural ground is, and operating from that. I don't operate in the world as though I'm oppressed. I recognize systems of oppression around me. I'm not deluded. You know, I don't go through the world thinking that, you know, life is rosy and all of that. There are disparities all over. However, I refuse to operate from that standpoint because I am free. You know, and in terms of you know, conversations of whiteness and white culture, we actually have been developing a documentary about white culture. And when we would talk about that, people would often say, well, white culture doesn't exist. It's like, excuse me.
Oh my gosh.
The reason people don't think white culture exists is if you are in a vat of milk, that's all you see. You know, I mean, it's so we are in, white people are in the midst of white culture. This system is a white cultural system. So if you can't step outside of it, if you're not an other in that system, if you're not the fly in the buttermilk, you're not gonna see.
You don't see it.
You know, if you're white and you're in milk, you blend in. So you don't see it as a system outside of yourself. So until you can step outside of it and see the system for what it is, those that are not white and in the milk see, oh my God, this shit is all around me, you know? So we recognize that immediately. But it's very hard for white people to recognize there's a white culture because they are just allowed to be within that system. You know?
Thank you, E.G. Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left. For those that just joined, we are in a conversation called Make It Matter. These are a series of conversations around race and equity. This is the second in a three-part series. Please share the information and have other people tune in on Friday. It's going to be a vibrant and possibly provocative conversation, and that's being done intentionally. I would love to spend the last 3 to 5 minutes with an open circle on anything that really resonates in the spirit of where do we go from here, right? So as we really think about action, as we think about cultural integrity, whose cultural integrity, the word integrity, and disparities, right? As things that need to open or shift, what is it that really resonates? And I would maybe just charge all of us to maybe frame it just for the sake of time and almost as a popcorn. You know what I mean? Like a popcorn or bullet. So like, what would you drop? So for example, I will start it. And if that doesn't work for you, if there's something you really want to get in there before the timer goes off, get it in. But for me, it is, my son is always asking me, why are there no brown teachers at the school?
Yes.
And we have talks about it, but that's it. So you want to shift the system? There has to be a shift. Young kids need teachers, instructors, professors that look like them.
Yes, I will say another thing, and that's what I will say is, when Katrina happened, people shared water. They shared water bottles, and they didn't care who they shared it with. But what you're talking about, the save us before you, is sharing power. And stepping out of your power. So my challenge would be, if you are a person who has had power and privilege and wealth, do you need more of it? Or can you step aside to create opportunities to that access for other people who are equally as qualified, if not more, but happen to be people of color?
Right, but I think going even further.
Popcorn, we got 2 minutes.
Going even further is dismantling the idea until we can start from a place of equity in the sense of personal human equity, meaning I am as equal as you.
Yes.
Regardless of what your conversation is about power or, you know, paradigm and, you know, all of that. Until we can engage as equal human beings in the conversation, there can't be equity. And this idea that, you know, I'm allowing you to come into the circle. I'm allowing you to come to the table. I'm allowing you access. No, I don't need your permission in terms of access until you can step down from that paradigm and say, it is not about me allowing you access. You have power and you have access. I have not been, you know, I need to remove whatever hold I have on so-called power, you know, and we can relate to each other. And that's the personal relational disparity that you're talking about. You know, until that can be removed, then it's hard for us to have a conversation, because you're seeing me as lower than you or lesser than you.
I love it, but you're also talking about something that really is important as we wrap up, and so I'm just gonna maybe invite the other three as a popcorn or bullet to share, but it's really also about the shackles that bind us, because as we face systemic racism, right, white supremacy, etc., there are shackles that are there, so just calling those out, and I love how you really eloquently talked about defining who you are in reference to the world that tries to tell us different. I will ask Maija, maybe a popcorn or bullet or anything you want to just throw in there in the next.
I just want to.
1 minute.
I just want to honor all the young people who I see as the leaders of this movement. So I want to just say that we have to start allowing ourselves, as you said, to step back. Allow ourselves to step back and let them lead. Let them lead.
I'm just going to throw one thing out.
Okay, throw it out.
2 words. Relational. I think we don't have relationships with each other, and we have to establish them. And I think it starts with people listening. And the last thing that I would say is stop putting Band-Aids on problems. Because that's what we do. Quiet the noise, put the Band-Aid on, walk away, people forget, they go on to the next thing. What's the problem we're trying to solve? It's not going to be solved overnight.
Thank you.
Merritt, is there one bullet that you throw in?
Boy, those were good bullets. Finding ways for communication and really meaning communication, really meaning listening, really meaning speaking from where you are, and taking everything that you bring with you, the good and the dirt.
I think this is a time where we just say thank you and remind people that there's a conversation again on Friday.
We're just scratching the surface. This is the first 3-part series. And yes, please join us. And I encourage you to check out more of what Catalyst Arts is doing and more of what Wang Young Hui is doing here with Third Place, and of course Inclusion Action. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to
so
say,
fun.
I just want, that's what I wanted to say. Even though like the camera might be turned off, it's like Ricardo Levins Morales always, because we sometimes will co-moderate, he's like, you live with that tension of like, it's like the time is running out. But I just have to, he's like, just calm down, because there's an infinite amount of time. And so I'm really thankful that there's such a vibrancy in the conversation that we had, because I think we all brought our whole selves. But because the timer ran out, we don't have to finish our conversation. But we will have a hard stop for today. But I want to invite you guys, I'm going to send an email and invite us to just kind of maybe still continue to talk a little bit if you guys are open to that, and just uplift everybody else's work, because I know you're already doing it, but I think this is the time where we just kind of keep those eyes even more wide.
You know what, one of the things that I'm just going to kind of affirm is that there's not enough conversation about the intersection. So you started out with that as a part of your opening remark, and there's just not enough conversation about it. And it is absolutely true that when people think about how they want to fund philanthropy or anything like that, I'm sorry, art is at the bottom of the list. And nobody really understands and appreciates enough that when you're looking for a vehicle to heal wounds, bring people together, etc., art is the best way for you to be able to do it. And it's a sustained action, right? And it's in the moment, it's today, it's fresh. It really is. But that conversation has to get deeper into the community. Now, I will tell you that there are institutions, Guthrie and the Walker, who have patrons that keep those doors alive, but those organizations also need to be a part of the conversation about, growing and expanding, the audience and the work. And I know that many of them have been doing that, and it's wonderful. But we're not putting our money at the grassroots.
I shared with Shay, and I'll share with all of you, but I've been working on for 2 years on this concept of a soulful movement that has arts at the center of it, that brings people together to heal. And I've got investors behind it, and it's going to happen. And we're going to have Andrea here on Friday, and I'm going to talk to her about making it happen it's gotta happen.
Yeah.
It's gotta happen, and
And your idea, put that right up in
But the,
there.
the whole rebuild conversation
Yeah.
that's going on right now in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, there is an opportunity for this conversation to fit in there, because right now we're all talking about physical infrastructure, which
And it
is
can be
important,
one-dimensional.
making sure people have basic needs met, because now we're food deserts and all this other stuff. And then there is some conversation about reform, but I trust me when I say in the
This-
reform scenario, nobody's talking about art.
So,
Yeah.
so I would love
I'm
to
just
challenge
saying-
that, because actually, University Rebuild.
No, I'm not saying,
Oh, no,
I'm not saying
it's
that you
just-
can't find individuals, but I'm saying
Oh.
when we're looking at the big plan,
No.
I'm saying, I'm
Yeah.
sitting in the meetings with the Minnesota Business
Yeah.
Partnership, and I'm telling you, nobody has said art.
we need to make that.
Yeah, yeah,
We need to forge that intersection.
Yes.
So-
That's how it's gonna.
So, what I guess I mean to say, and in this moment, is that we would like the art that is happening, that we're collecting to become a big conversation, and a community conversation, a religious conversation, and a business conversation, an art conversation, and we're starting a conversation around that next week. And I don't really have all the resources that I need. I'm reaching out to a lot of people to ask to help sort of bump that, but we do want individuals to come into that conversation with all of these things in mind, because it's how we tell the history of this moment, right? And
I love it.
and I think it's not just about,
I hear it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just gonna say, I'm in a conversation
Great.
with the business.
Okay, we about to
If you have one
simmer
piece
this.
of paper
Yep.
that just
Yes.
describes
Yep.
the vision,
Yep.
and you put your names on
Yep.
it,
Yeah.
we will put it in front
There
of
you
them,
go.
and then it'll be on you
Great.
to run with.
Advance it forward.
Yeah, and
Integrity.
I just want to say one thing too, especially to those, to Shay and EG and people that are active, because we touched on this a little bit in the first conversation, and that's that I think some of us need to look to you to help us understand who has capacity and who doesn't at different times. Just because one side of the conversation is you can't just bring artists of color in, or artists that talk about our diversity and experiences and have that be a fix, which is completely, true. We have to come to the middle. It's got to be bringing people together at that intersection.
Even in just thinking about Lake Street, like how are we gonna rebuild Lake
Exactly.
Street? We have to have the intersection of art and business and community. We have to. I mean, there's no other way to do it.
Okay, so
So
I'm just
okay,
saying,
we
if
got
that's
you.
true,
I hear you
who
loud and clear.
is calling up the Lake Street Council that's
Yeah.
got $6 million right now to help
Exactly.
rebuild Lake Street? And that's just the little money that they have. This is not the Target
Yeah.
money, the Walgreens money, or
Yeah.
any of the big money. Just people putting money in a pot. I'm just saying, they've got to
And
commit.
This is why I love this woman, because it's true, and that's why, Sharon, I want to uplift you on that, because I do believe that sometimes in the work, not distracted, but we're heavy in the work. So I want to name that I'm always asking, why am I here? And I think it was to hear that. And we do need to make sure that we are in those conversations and centering the art in that kind of reform, that we need to be in that.
And articulating the power of what you can do.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly, and that, because if the artist conversations stay in the artist community, and the business conversations stay in the
Right,
business community, that's why I've had the trajectory that I have, is that I can see the huge disconnect, and so we're gonna do this. We're gonna bring people together, we're gonna get them to invest, we're gonna make it
So I'm
happen.
going to do a visual thing, and I'm going to stand next to this man, and I'm going to say that he has juice in this conversation,
Yes.
because he has history on Lake Street. And so when you're writing the story, or the proposal, or the pitch to the Lake Street Council, you talk about the power of this particular artist in drawing attention to Lake Street and bringing people onto Lake Street, getting some people on Lake Street that